From the University of Alberta Alumni Association, it's What the Job. I'm Matt Ray.
So many jobs, so many traditional careers are being made redundant or unnecessary. So that requires for all workers to identify not what industry they're in, but what are my core capabilities and my natural gifts and talents, and how can I apply those in maybe the industry that I currently work in, or more likely, a totally different industry and set of opportunities.
Today I'm joined by Todd Hirsch, the Vice President and Chief Economist for ATB. Todd talks about his career journey, some of the hard choices he's made, and some of the hard choices that were made for him. But mostly, we talk about the future of work. Will AI and automation steal our jobs? How do we navigate the new zigzag career path? And is universal basic income inevitable? Todd answers these questions and more in this episode of What the Job. What the Job is made possible with the support of our affinity partner, TD Insurance. Did you know that through the TD Insurance Mellish Monix program, University of Alberta alumni are entitled to preferred rates on car, home, condo, and renters insurance? Save even more by bundling your car and home insurance. To learn more about how you can save, please visit tdinsurance.com/UAlberta alumni. So what's your name and what's your job?
My name is Todd Hirsch, and I'm the Vice President and Chief Economist with ATB Financial.
And what do you do for that job? I mean, no one can ever pin down what they do exactly, but what are some of the things?
It's a great question. And when people hear, oh, a chief economist, what on earth does a chief economist do? I'm a little bit unique to other chief economists, I think. I would spend 60 to 70% of my time traveling around Alberta and outside of Alberta as well, the country, rest of Canada, talking about what is going on in our economy, some of the challenges we're seeing right now in Alberta for sure, and some of these other big themes like the future of work and the economics of community, some of these big topics that I think are really important. So I spend a lot of my time doing public presentations, and the rest of my time I spend probably, like everybody else, answering emails. I do some media stuff, and I put together some material that's a resource for the rest of my team members at ATB Financial.
So is it kind of like trying to take the temperature of what's going on in terms of?
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. I shy away. People, when people think, oh, an economist, you can, you're a fortune teller, you can see what's coming. I can't really. Little known secret, I don't have a crystal ball, and no economist does. But taking the temperature of what's going on is, I think, a good way to put it. Right now, some of the challenges we're seeing in Alberta, obviously with our energy sector, we're not the same province economically as we were 6 years ago, but we're transitioning to something new. And my job is to help people make sense of what that something new might look like. And maybe the topic of what we're talking about this afternoon, how we can navigate our way through a work world that is changing very rapidly.
Yeah, later on, after we record this, you're going to do a talk on the future of work.
That's right. Yeah.
What's that all about? What is the future of work? Robots going to do our jobs? Is that basically it?
I'll talk about robots and artificial intelligence and automation. When we think about robots, I think there is a bit of a disconnect in a lot of people's minds because they hear so much about robots and AI taking all our jobs. But when we look around us, we don't tend to see a lot of robots moving around us. Maybe in a manufacturing or an assembly line, there might be robotics, but for the rest of us, we don't really see a lot of robots. And it leaves people a bit confused or disconnected with, well, what do we really mean then about robots taking our jobs? And I think what's happening, it's not necessarily for most of us that robots are taking our jobs, but really more automated systems and artificial intelligence and learning processes are making a lot of jobs simply unnecessary. So they're eliminating a lot of traditional jobs. They're creating some new jobs. But I think we tend to focus as humans on the jobs that are being lost. And what does this mean for those workers? And where are they going to find work? And what about the rest of us? And everything is changing so rapidly, and it leaves people feeling a little bit anxious. And I get the anxiety around it, but it's not so much that robots are taking our jobs. It's more that automated processes are making those jobs just unnecessary.
Has this sort of always been the trend? I mean, in terms of like labor always changing and constantly evolving, or are we at a time where there's a spike, where it's really changing rapidly?
I think the answer to both those questions is yes. So at least when we look back over, the history of modern economies, Europe, North America, over the last 200 or 300 years, there have always been waves of disruptive technology that have come around. And every single time that's happened, there's been anxiety. We think about the Luddites who smashed all the machinery in industrial age England because they foresaw that their jobs were going to be eliminated, and they were right. So there's always been some anxiety around disruptive technologies replacing jobs. In the past, however, every single time there's been a disruptive technology, in the wake of that disruption, there's always been new jobs and new industries that have come up. This time around, now that we're in the early 21st century, this time we're also seeing new waves of disruptive technologies, artificial intelligence, robotics we've talked about. I think there too we will see in the wake of this new jobs and new industries. But what is different this time is the pace of the rate of change that we're seeing this. This isn't happening over 100 years. This is happening over a decade or maybe even years, or in some industries, even months. How rapidly those jobs are being made redundant by these new technologies. So in some ways, this isn't anything new. A disruptive technology eliminates jobs, but new industries and jobs come around. But in many ways, this is new simply because we have not seen a rate of change this fast.
How do people stay relevant or versatile in a career landscape that changes so rapidly?
How do they stay relevant? That's a great question. I think that's what a lot of us are sort of grappling with. I think the most important skill or attribute for workers of any point in their career, even if they're starting or if they're near the end of their career, we have to be flexible and adaptable to be able to take advantage of new opportunities when they come around. That's the only way we're going to be able to be relevant and remain relevant, is being able to pivot. And I know I'm not the first one to talk about this. I mean, everyone is talking about flexible and adaptable and how we have to take advantages where new opportunities arise. But even if I'm not the first one to say this, it really is true. So many jobs, so many traditional careers are being made redundant or unnecessary. So that requires for all workers to identify not what industry they're in, but what are my core capabilities and my natural gifts and talents, and how can I apply those in maybe the industry that I currently work in, or more likely, a totally different industry and set of opportunities. So the metaphor I like to use, back in the 20th century when I was coming out of the University of Alberta, and like a lot of grads at the time, we went into this understanding of employment and career. It's a straight shot. You pick a major and you graduate with that degree, and then the idea is, well, now you find a job in that industry, and your career is expected to more or less be a straight line until you retire. Today, it is a zigzag line, and I think we're in trouble if we assume that whatever major we follow or pursue as an undergrad or grad student, we're delusional if we think, well, I'm going to work now in this industry for 40 years. You might, but you're not likely to. More likely, you're going to have to take your skills and your core competencies and be able to apply those in different, in some ways radically different opportunities in different industries.
It's a different world. I mean, my father worked in the same factory, in the same job for 55 years.
Yeah, mine did too.
And, for him, that was a possibility, but it just seems so unlikely now.
I suppose it's possible, but it would be very much the exception for a young person starting a job or a career today to end his or her career, say in 40 or 50 years, in the same industry, never mind the same company. I think that will be very exceptional. But you look back, 40, 50, 60 years ago, that was both normal and it was also an expectation. There was an assumption that, well, you start this job in this industry, I'm a dentist or I'm a mechanic or I'm a nurse. The expectation was, well, that's my career and I'm going to follow that through. Today, it's very, very different.
But the competencies and the skills that you've picked up from your degree, whether or not your degree is some sort of more or less vocational straight shot, as we call it, towards a job, those can be flexible and used in different career avenues.
Absolutely. And I think this is where we're starting to wrap our heads around, our competencies rather than maybe the knowledge that we would have learned in school. And again, going back to the 20th century, the whole purpose of going to a university or a polytechnic or a trade school was to, gain knowledge, have 4 years of information pounded into your head. And now I'm going to start applying that knowledge. Here's what I've learned, and I'm going to do this for 40 years. Now, it's not so much the knowledge that we learn, it's more, are we learning how to learn? Because I'm going to have to take what I'm good at doing naturally. That might be working with people, that might be managing systems or project management, it might be writing, it might be, verbal communication, whatever it's going to be. How can I take those, maybe applying the skills that I've learned in university, but how can I apply those in any number of shifting opportunities that come up?
Yeah, it's really fascinating to think about. And, even my own background taking English as a degree, you don't really even think about the kind of skills that you're developing along the way. But they are transferable and applicable. And, as we've been doing this podcast, a lot of the people we talk to have come from a science degree, and now they're working in restaurants but they still see connections between what they used to do and what they do now. So if you are someone who is, let's say you're early in your undergrad and you are thinking about a career, should you still plan like this is the education I need to get to that career? Or is it important to maybe talk to people in that line of work and think about what kind of skills they use, or maybe both?
I guess both. The more talking you do with people and trying to understand how their careers and their employment has evolved, the more of that we do, the better. But as we start to think about the skills that we're gaining in our undergrad degree, rather than just the information that we're gaining, it's more the skills that are important. The information is almost secondary. And this is why I tell a lot of young people, especially those that are starting university or college or whatever, they come to me for some reason as if I know the answer to this, but they
I was hoping you did for today.
Well, they ask, well, what program should I take at university? What's going to get me a really good job? What department, or what should I pick as my major? And I always tell them, worry about it a little bit, but don't worry too much. It's more important, much more important, first of all, that you pursue something you're interested in. Otherwise, you're not likely to do well in it. Pick something you're interested in, not where you think is going to be the biggest paycheck. And then it's the skills that you pick up as you are going through that degree, not necessarily the knowledge. And in a lot of cases, especially some of the science or the technical applications, what you're learning in year one may be completely outdated by year 4 when you graduate. So don't get too caught up in, obviously you want to learn the information and do well in your courses, but focus more on the soft skills that you are picking up, the managing timelines, working with people and working in groups. Are you a good communicator? Are you empathetic to those around you? Are you a team player that you can understand how important it is to work in groups? Those things are actually in a lot of ways more important than the actual data or information that you might be learning and studying. So focus more on the skills that you're gaining, the interpersonal skills, the soft skills that you're gaining. Worry about your major a little bit. Don't worry too much. It's more important that you start something and complete it. But when you come out of university, the biggest advice I can give to people is cast your net broadly, when you're looking for opportunities. If your degree is in anthropology, or if it's in economics, or if it's in, biosciences, don't look just for jobs in those fields. You might find one, and that might be great. More likely, you're not going to find one. But if you cast your net really broadly, you will be able to find all kinds of great career opportunities in really, really different fields that you might not have expected.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think it really plays with what we hear a lot on this podcast about the soft skills versus the hard skills. I always wonder is, how do people develop soft skills? Because it's difficult. Like, how do you develop a greater sense of empathy? How do you develop those intercommunication skills that you need to get along with the team?
That's a really great question. And it's a little bit outside of my field of knowledge. But my guess is some of it is natural. Some people are just naturally empathetic. Some people are natural communicators. Some people are natural humorists. Some people are natural storytellers. But I do think that it's possible to learn, or at least improve, in all of those soft skills. The more you associate with people, the more you work with people around you, the better you're going to get at those soft skills. And that's why it's really important. For example, when you are pursuing your degree, when you are at a university or college, get involved with things outside of your department. Get involved with clubs on campus, and get involved in volunteer work. In the past, when I've been had the opportunity to hire people, and I look at people's resumes, applicants who come through the door, and I do a short list, set of interviews. I'm more interested in, okay, they did good GPA in their undergrad degree or whatever, 4-year degree and whatever it is, and, you look at the grades. But I'm way more interested in other activities. What else have you been involved in? Tell me about the clubs that you got involved with on campus. Tell me about the volunteer stuff. Tell me about the sports or arts and culture that you're engaged in, because those things are going to give me a better indication. Has this person really done the heavy work in developing the soft skills? A 4.0 GPA is great, but if they don't come with the soft skills of being able to communicate well and work on a team and work with humor and all of those things that you develop by working with people on clubs and volunteer stuff, that's really what I'm more interested in as a person hiring somebody.
And volunteering is such a great way to build skill sets and apply the things that you've learned.
Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about your career journey?
Yeah, for sure.
So you got a BA from the University of Guelph, you got a BA from the University of Alberta. I went to the University of Guelph. What did you do after that?
So I graduated from the University of Alberta in 1989, which makes me feel really old. And my plan was actually to go to McMaster University, where I had been accepted to do a master's degree in Hamilton. But I had a job opportunity. And listeners have to remember, if they're old enough to remember the 80s, they will know the job market in the 80s was way worse in Alberta than it is today. Really? I mean, it's terrible now. But the jobs in 1989 for, summer jobs, they were really bad. The year previous, 1988, my summer job literally was, I worked at 7-Eleven. That was my summer job. But in 1989, I had this amazing summer job opportunity in Calgary. And growing up in Edmonton, I was an Edmonton boy. In a lot of ways, I still am. But, you grow up in Edmonton believing you hate Calgary. And now I was faced with a dilemma. It's like, I have this really good research job at an organization called the Canada West Foundation, which is still going strong. But I had a great opportunity it was a summer research position in Calgary. So it was too good of a job to turn down. So I said, well, I'll plug my nose for 4 months. I'll move to Calgary. How bad could it be? And it turned out to be a great summer opportunity. And in fact, I enjoyed the work there so much that at the end of my 4-year summer, 4-month summer, the people I worked with at Canada West Foundation, they asked if I wanted to stay on in the fall in a part-time research position. And I thought that sounded like a pretty good idea. So I put off my grad studies for a year. And I didn't go off to Hamilton that fall. I stayed here in Calgary and worked. and always intending to go back and do my master's. And then the year I was here in Calgary working, I made some connections with some people in the Department of Economics at the University of Calgary. So I thought, well, actually, things are going pretty well here. I ended up staying in Calgary doing my master's, stayed working at the Canada West Foundation, and now 31 years later, I'm still in Calgary. So I often describe myself as an accidental Calgarian because I never intended to move here.
I guess that's a good excuse if you're from Edmonton to be like it was an accident.
It is. And I'm still an Oilers fan, and I have a deep love actually for both cities, my hometown of Edmonton and my adopted home town now of Calgary.
I really like this idea of just taking the opportunity and going with it and seeing where it goes. And it seems to apply so much to what you were just talking about in terms of like the future of work. Sometimes you have to go where the opportunities lead you and feel out where it can lead.
That's right. And, in the past, we've put a lot of emphasis on, setting goals and being really, really focused. And, some of that is true without doubt. But there's also something to be said with being flexible and taking advantage of opportunities that might come up. And there's a little bit of a tension in those two bits of advice. The one advice is be focused in your career, don't let anything sort of shiny objects or squirrels distract you from that. And the other bit of advice being be flexible and look for opportunities where they come up. They're almost opposite pieces of advice, and they're both true at the same time. It really takes some wisdom and discernment to know when to focus and when to flex. And that is, that's sort of the game of life that everyone goes through, trying to understand when to do the right thing.
Yeah, I mean, weighing an opportunity is a difficult decision.
Yeah, and you can become so focused on a singular goal that you can miss all kinds of opportunities that are waving their hands right in your face. But again, there is something to be said for goal setting, but there's also something to be said for don't be so focused on your goal that you're going to miss great opportunities.
Do you ever think about what your life would be like if you went to
Hamilton?
I
think about that all the time.
Where do you think you'd be?
Well, my guess is life would have probably unfolded in an amazing way too. Had I gone off to McMaster, who knows what would have happened? I a firm enough believer that there's not just one route. If you're a positive-minded person and you work hard and you get along, play well with others in the playground, that life opens up and opportunities will have been created. So I don't ever think for a minute, it's a good thing I didn't go off to McMaster University, because things might have, obviously they would have been different, but they might have been, just as good, maybe even better. But where I'm at right now in my career and in my life, it's, I'm 53 years old. When I graduated from the University of Alberta, I don't think I thought this is what I was going to be doing. But I love what I'm doing now and where life has brought me.
Yeah, sometimes I think when people consider opportunities and how the opportunities shape them, they don't also think about the agency that they have in those opportunities and the way that it is their own skill and their own character and their own strengths that also shape their journey.
Yeah, that's right. I've often used the image of a plinko, or what's the Japanese pinball game? It has a different name. But I think a lot of listeners will know these pinball machines where all the little steel marbles start at the top and they drop their way through all the little pegs. And every time it hits a peg, it's got to go one way or the other. It's unpredictable. It's really random which way it's going to go. But everything ends up falling to the bottom and, landing in a good spot. So that's why I never, you have to... The challenge in life is to, when a decision comes, am I going to this university or that, or am I going to take this job, or go and travel abroad? You have to make those decisions. But I always say, make a wise decision, give it some thought, but don't freak out too much about if you're making a terrible mistake, because again, if you're positive and you work hard, opportunities are going to come up.
It's curious too, because I think the shape of the decision changes as you get older. It's a lot harder to make a decision at, say, 45 than it would be at 24.
Yeah, that's right. And, where I'm at in life at 53, life isn't, I still have decisions ahead of me too, and some of them might be pretty tough. And I've had to make really tough decisions. And I've been laid off twice in my career, and that's been horrible. Speaking of being laid off of a job, so many people in Alberta right now have been laid off. And I would never ever want to tell this to somebody who's just been laid off, but I really do believe it is actually probably one of the best things that can happen to somebody for a couple of reasons. One, if you experience being laid off of a job, for one thing, it gives you an enormous amount of empathy for other people who might be laid off. The other reason why I think it's important or valuable is that when you are laid off a job, you become very aware that as a person, you are so much more than just that job. And the longer you tend to do a job, the more naturally we become attached to it. And we almost, our personality becomes entrenched in that job. And that's why so many people, including me in the times I've been laid off, we feel we're in free fall. Like, how could this happen? That job was everything. But you realize, well, actually, it's lousy to be laid off, especially the loss of income. But you realize that, in fact, you are so much more. You have so many more opportunities and so many more other personal strengths and characteristics that can take you all kinds of places that one job probably wasn't going to lead you.
Yeah, and your worth is never just your job, nor is your identity.
That's right. And in some ways, I don't know if it's this might be a sexist thing to say, but I think it's harder for men sometimes, especially if they've been in a single job for a long, long time. Women tend to be, it's not that they're not committed to their jobs, but they tend to have a bit more of a social network around them. They tend to be a bit more flexible when it comes that way. A lot of men, especially as we get older, I think about my dad, he was laid off of his job of 37 years. Everybody he knew worked at that company, and he didn't have a resume dusted off, and he didn't have skills to pivot easily into different career opportunities. He had to work pretty hard, to find something else to do. But that's why, again, I don't wish unemployment or a layoff notice on anybody, and I wouldn't want to tell them to their face, this is the best thing that's happened to you, because they're going to want to punch me in the face, because it is lousy. But in almost every situation I know, when people look back and they reflect on unemployment or a job loss, they'll look back at it and say, boy, actually, that was the best thing that could have happened to me at the time. Didn't feel like it at that moment, but my life actually unfolded in whole new ways that it wouldn't have had I stayed at that one job.
And I think sometimes people need a change and they don't realize it,
Yeah, that's right. And unemployment is a job loss is a very unpleasant way, but to experience, being pushed out of a nest, and you got to learn to fly in a different direction.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good way to put it. It's just wild to think about your father, like getting laid off. And my own dad, I couldn't even imagine, because I think one of the reasons that he stayed in that career is that stability. We talk about gender in these roles. I think, at least for that generation, and still in some ways, I think we're more progressive in some ways, is that when you have to be the provider. So your job is irrelevant. It just has to be whatever you get the most money to do. And mental health is not something we ever would talk about in that kind of.
Never. We never talked about mental health back. Well, I shouldn't say never, but certainly in the 70s or 80s, sort of when my father was in his career, no one talked about mental health then. No one talked about stress or depression, or very rare. That's why I think in a lot of ways, the world might seem like an angry, sad place today, but I think in so many ways we're in a better spot, because now in 2020, it is common for people in businesses and industries and universities. It's common. In fact, it's necessary that we talk about mental health. Same way we would talk about physical health. And now we're finally starting to be more open and comfortable talking about mental health. And I think it's really valuable, really important.
Oh, me too. And it's taken so long. And I talked to a lot of guests too about the stress of their job. A lot of them work some high stress jobs, and it's difficult. And you need to be able to talk about it.
Yeah.
You need an avenue for that.
Absolutely.
Let's talk a little bit about more about your career path and how you got to how did you end up where you are now?
How did this all happen? So I worked at the Canada West Foundation. After I finished my master's degree at UCalgary, I stayed on at Canada West as a senior research associate until 1997. And then actually that was one of the jobs I got laid off, only because I had outgrown the position. And my boss, the president of Canada West at the time, he really was doing me a favor, although it sure didn't feel like it at the time. But, I basically went to him and I said, I've been doing this job for this many years, and I think I was making $28,000. Like, it was just a pittance. And I said, I think I need a salary adjustment. I've got a master's degree. I've got 7 years of experience. And he said, you are absolutely right. You deserve way more than $28,000 a year. And that's why I'm terminating your position. And I felt like saying, no, this isn't the way this conversation was supposed to go. But he was, in a figurative sense, he was kicking me out of the nest. He knew that I had outgrown that position. The reality was they as a not-for-profit research group, they weren't in a position to pay researchers anymore. They needed some junior researchers that they would be able to pay less. I had outgrown that. So I was kicked out of the nest. My world, felt like it was unraveling. But I was able to get a job at Canadian Pacific Railway. It was the time, about 1997, when CP Rail was moving its head office from Montreal to Calgary. And I was one of the new hires that they brought on here in Calgary. I was a business analyst for the commercial group, one of the commercial groups. And later I was in sort of putting together some reports and data analysis. And I did that until 2001. Then I went and worked for the Bank of Canada, which was a great experience. I was here in the Calgary Prairie Regional Office, so I wasn't in Ottawa, but I had a chance to be in Ottawa with my other co-workers at the Bank of Canada fairly often. Amazing experience. Honestly, I worked with some of the smartest people that I will ever know working at the Bank of Canada. But ultimately, it wasn't my long-term home either. And then eventually I came to ATB Financial and was brought on as the chief economist in 2007. And that's where I've been ever since.
So you've been doing this for a little more than 10 years. And what have you noticed in terms of what's changed in these 10 years?
Oh, a lot has changed, both with ATB Financial, but a lot has changed with the province of Alberta and our economy as well. In the 12 years I've been at ATB, we have, as a province, we've gone through 2 really nasty recessions. People kind of tend to forget about the recession of 2009, which was an even deeper recession than 2015 and 2016. What was different about 2009 is that recession was deep, but it was short. 2010, everything came roaring back. I often joke, if you had a good nap one Sunday afternoon in 2009, you might have missed the whole thing. 2015 and 2016, nobody missed those 2 years of back-to-back recession. So the province has been through a lot of ups and downs in the last 12 years. My role at ATB Financial has changed over the last 10 years or 12 years. When I started in 2007, the expectation, the job description that they gave me was that, I might do maybe 2 or 3 public presentations or speaking presentations, 2 or 3 a month. But that actually has been the piece of my job that has really taken off, because I think I'm pretty good at it. I think I'm a pretty good communicator. And it's one of those examples of, do as many things as you can, and the cream's going to rise to the top. The things that you're really good at doing, that's where you're going to find success. So now, rather than 2 or 3 a month, I would do probably 5 or 6 presentations a week, all around the province. And I love doing it. It really is the favorite thing that I enjoy doing. But it's one of those things, if you do it often enough, you get good at it. It doesn't stress me out to do it. But it's practice, the more you practice something, the better you get. So that's been the biggest thing that's changed in my job is how much emphasis I now place and time I put into public speaking.
Mm-hmm. It's funny that you do that 5 or 6 a week, because I'm sure there are people who are just terrified.
They are, yeah.
I would never want to do that. There's that old line that public speaking is the thing that people fear more than death. So
I know.
at
Yeah,
a funeral,
they'd rather die than speak at their cousin's wedding or whatever it is. But yeah.
Yeah, well, but you learn to do it, and you're clearly a good speaker, and it's great to have you on the show today. We're going to do the lightning round,
Okay.
which is brought to you by our affinity partner, TD Insurance. So this is just a series of questions, and you just whatever comes to your mind first.
Okay.
Have you ever been fired? You've been laid off, but have you ever been fired from a job?
I have never been fired from a job.
You know what? Few people that come on the show have been fired. Only a couple of people. It's kind of funny.
But I have been laid off twice, never fired.
When you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, that's a funny question. I used to, the pat answer I would give is a millionaire, because I watched Gilligan's Island and I thought Thurston Howell had the millionaire. I thought that was a job, and I thought that looked pretty fun. But I'm not a millionaire, and it's not a job. But I think when I was a teenager, I wanted to be an architect. That was something that I wanted to do.
And when you got into university?
Well, I went into math in university only because math was my best subject in high school. So I thought, okay, I guess I'll take math. And then in my second year of math, at the U of A, I realized I'm actually not as good at math as the rest of these students are. And that's when I pivoted. I shifted my major to economics and finished my degree in that.
What's something that people might not know about your job?
They might not know about actually how little I deal with numbers. People think I'm a real numbers guy.
I would have thought you were.
Yeah. And people are often surprised, and a lot of economists, to be honest, they do work with numbers an awful lot. And different roles I've had in the past as an economist, I would have spent more time with numbers. Today, I actually don't spend a lot of time with spreadsheets and models. I have a couple of people on my team, my economics team at ATB, that do that. But I spend very little time with numbers, and I spend more of my time with qualitative ideas about the economy and trying to communicate those verbally and in a written form.
Oh, that's kind of fascinating. It's nice to see that economics is such like a holistic and wide field, right? That takes in all those
It
practices.
really is, yeah. People think it's one thing, but it can be. You can have a career in economics that is very, very different.
Yeah. What advice do you have for someone who feels like they're in a career rut?
Whew. Well, it would be easy to say, just quit your job and do something else. But that may or may not be good advice, depending on where you're at in your life. If you have dependents, for example, or a mortgage, or, your life is set up in a certain way, you may not have the liberty to just say, I'm going to quit this job. But if you're stuck in a rut in your job, I would say, go to your bosses or your managers and say, I want to blow up this role. I want to do something bigger with this role. That's actually what I did in 2019 with my role. I wouldn't describe myself as being in a rut, but I went to my bosses and I said, I'm ready to take on some bigger ideas and bigger thoughts as an economist. And they loved the idea. If that doesn't work, polish off your resume and start looking for opportunities in different industries, because the world is full of them.
I think people forget sometimes that their supervisors or whoever they report to, want them to be happy in their job and want them to do good work. So
they should, if it's a good company.
Yeah. You'd hope so. If you weren't doing this, what kind of job do you think you'd be doing?
If I wasn't an economist, now, at this point in my career, if I wasn't an economist, I still think I would be a public speaker of some sort. I might be in media. I might be a journalist. I might be somebody who maybe is on radio or television. But I think my natural skill and ability, and I did not know this at 23, but at 53, I think I'm a pretty good verbal communicator. So I would be doing something in communication somehow.
When do you think it clicked for you that this was something you're good at?
It was probably when I had started at ATB, or maybe even when I was at the Canada West Foundation doing some public presentations, just because I could never figure out, why are people so terrified of doing this? As long as you're prepared, you have to put some work into preparing it. But I think it was fairly early on, but it wasn't until maybe the last 5 or 10 years where I really realized. So by that, I was in my 40s. So I often tell people who are in their 20s, if you don't really know yet what your natural ability is, don't freak out. You're going to find it. do a lot of things. And again, what you're good at doing, that's what's going to rise to the top.
Yeah, I think sometimes it takes people time to realize what their skills are.
Absolutely, yeah.
What's your favorite thing about your job?
The favorite thing about my job is the number of people I get to meet across Alberta and across the country. Really interesting people. I mean, one day I might be talking to farmers in Lethbridge, and the very next day I'm talking to the CEOs of some of the biggest companies in Canada and everything in between. And how all of those people, it doesn't matter who they all have passion for their country. They all have passion for the industries that they're in. Many of them are fearful. Many of them are optimistic, but they all have a unique perspective. And that's the favorite thing, is that I love hearing and being able to talk to one-on-one different people.
If you could go back in time and talk to yourself right after you graduated, do you have any advice you'd give
university?
Yourself? Yeah.
That's a really good question.
Let's say from your undergrad. Yeah.
Yeah. Advice I would give to myself. Maybe it's the advice I give to young people now. Don't freak out too much about what's coming next. I know at 23, when I had finished, I probably was, anxious about what job am I going to get, or, because really when I finished at the U of A, other than the summer job I had, my job was at Earl's Restaurant, which, by the way, this is a whole other topic, but I think jobs in the service sector, everyone should wait on tables at least once in their life, and you can build a whole career out of that. But so I would tell myself, don't be afraid of a job in the service sector. Don't be afraid of working at 7-Eleven or Earl's. Again, be positive and work hard and get along well with others, and opportunity is going to open up. I think that's the advice I'd give to my 23-year-old self.
That's fantastic. The last thing I wanted to talk to you about, just because you're talking about the future of work, is the idea of a future without work. Like the idea of like a universal income or something like that. Is that a possibility? Is that a thing?
Absolutely. I'm going to be talking about universal basic income tonight. I think some form of it is almost inevitable. And I don't know, as an economist, if I'm ready to, put my neck out and say, I'm supportive of one, because there's a lot of questions about it. Exactly what does it look like, and how does it work? And are we taking away incentive for people to work hard? And are we, encouraging laziness? All of these things that generally, when people are opposed to it, these arguments that they trot out. But I think in some ways it's an inevitability, I think. And I think we need to start a conversation about it. I don't think we should just, sort of like whack-a-mole, crush the idea every time somebody brings it up. We might need more pilot projects on it. And I think it's a real shame the one in Ontario that had started, got canceled, because that's the only way we learn, is through pilot projects, especially big experiments like this. But whatever it looks like in the future, I think some form of it is inevitable. And that's why if we, agree on it or not, I think we need to start talking about it and testing pilot projects on it and designing it in the best way that we can.
Yeah, it is a fascinating and bold future
it is,
that we hurtle towards.
I remain positive.
Yeah, I think that's all you can do. I look forward to hearing you talk about it. And thanks so much for coming on the show today.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Hey, thanks for listening to this episode of What the Job. And thanks to our guest, Todd Hirsch, for sharing his story and expertise. Before we go, let me remind you to check out UAlberta Switchboard. Whether you're looking for a new job, a mentor in your field, or volunteer experience to enhance your resume, Switchboard has you covered. It's kind of like Kijiji for jobs, and best of all, it's free. Give it a try at uab.ca/sboard. Thanks for listening. For What the Job, I'm Matt Ray. See you next time.